why is it so easy to have difficult conversations within a restricted group according to certain rules of interaction, which have been largely forgotten, and what is making that so difficult to do in this larger container? And it's sort of fantastic that you see the same problem on different continents and different countries and different cultures, so that there really is some sort of global environmental variable that is making it very tough to do in public. So I think that in some sense it's a great premise, but it is also the conceit here is that it's actually relatively satisfying and easy to do it once you agree to what a conversation is.
Does everyone accept that?
Yeah, I mean, the premise is it is in fact terribly difficult to do widely, and you do it at great reputational risk, it seems, but it's totally bewildering that this is the case. I mean, it should be, as Eric points out, it should be easy to do. It should be, I mean, these are, with a modicum of charity and with, I mean, this trope that Eric, I don't know if this is your coinage or not, the notion of steelmanning, but the ability to, the practice of putting your opponent's view in a form that he or she would agree with, and then addressing that, your arguments to that. I mean, that is so rare in normal society, within journalism or the talking heads on television, that it seems like some sort of intellectual breakthrough and a moral breakthrough, but it's just basic
simply to be
decency,
moderately generous towards your opponent. Yeah. Maajid, you were going to jump in
I think that when you give everyone a voice, there are good things that happen with that and bad things. And one of the bad things is that everyone has a voice, everyone has a platform, therefore everyone has an audience that they're playing to. And if everyone is attempting to please their own audience and the echo chamber that their audience is and the confirmation bias that is prevalent, then people aren't speaking to each other. They're speaking at each other to their audiences. And that's when often you find people are speaking, actually, they're speaking across each other, because really what's happening is I'm too busy worried about what my followers will think about what I'm saying, rather than actually having a conversation with the person in front of me. And I'm also worried about the backlash. And I notice, I'm also worried about the backlash if I say something I want to say from my followers or from other people's followers. So I notice there's also hypocrisy in that. So often the backlash is weaponized for political purposes. And so if you compare, let's say, Roseanne Barr and something she said on Twitter with, say, this lady Young on the New York Times editorial board. What's her first name? Forgive me. Sarah, right? And the same people that are calling for Roseanne never to have a TV show ever again are defending Sarah. And the same people that are saying that Sarah should be sacked were defending Roseanne, because actually it's all about what your audience wants. And you cannot have a civilized conversation if that's what your thought process is. And if everyone, therefore, is playing to their audiences rather than actually having a conversation with the person in front of them.
Let's address, sorry, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I did. I think there are a couple things. One lesson from the fact that there is, for lack of a better term, an IDW that is succeeding in having difficult conversations, and there is a general experience of difficult conversations running off the rails. You can tell that there must be something distinct, and you can pretty well infer that it's going to be the need to do something counterintuitive. That people who are not succeeding in having those conversations are abiding by some set of rules, and somewhere in those rules is something you're going to have to reverse, even though it feels wrong. So maybe it's the generosity towards the person that you are disagreeing with, imagining that they may have a point that you haven't seen, for example. Another thing is that there are a very tiny number of bad actors, percentage-wise, but they have a very big effect. It does not take very many people trying to derail a conversation to prevent that conversation from happening. And so figuring out how you are going to bar those people in order that the rest can have the conversation is maybe rule one. You can't have the bad actor in a position to disrupt everybody else. And the final thing is, there's just an unnatural fact about the number of people involved in these conversations. The internet is putting us all in contact with each other. And that's having a consequence for language that is really unfortunate, which is that every term is becoming incredibly broad because it comes to include everybody's version of that term. So language has become so crude that we can't have a conversation until we do something, again, counterintuitive, which is invest the time on the front end to say, all right, well, this term, like let's say race, for example, what exactly do we mean? Before we jump into a conversation about race, can we define that well enough that we all know what the term means when we get there, so that we're not tripping over basically, effectively, mutually exclusive definitions that cause misunderstanding?
Why would there be a misunderstanding about the meaning of the word race?
Oh, it's a great test case because, I mean, in fact, I've changed my position on it because I constantly heard as a biologist that I'm supposed to believe that race doesn't exist because there's more genetic variation within so-called races than between. And that's true, but also meaningless. And so I was pushing back on that for years because that mathematical fact does not imply that races don't exist. It implies that there's a demarcation issue. The reason I've reversed my position is that the way we categorize race actually follows effectively the one-drop rule, where we will call somebody black because they have some black in them. That's not a biological phenomenon. That's a sociological phenomenon that's responsive to a kind of selection. So when I say race, that's very imprecise. I will tend to say population because that is a rigorous term, and I will try to avoid race because it is very hard to define in any way that is rigorous. On the other hand, if I'm going to participate in a conversation about race, I have to figure out, am I going to try to get everybody in that conversation on board with a different term, or am I going to sign up for that term and potentially run afoul of what I know to be true?
Brett, you've just done what I was going to ask you to do. Douglas, you look wistful in a way that I can't tell whether you're flatulent or
It's
about
very
to
hard.
talk.
Sometimes it's wistful, sometimes it's anger. And it's very hard. There's a very tiny line.
What I did want to get you to do up front so that we don't get derailed into just talking about one way in which it's difficult to have civil conversations was for each of you, who each have quite specific fields of expertise and quite specific interests, to give us a brief articulation of a way in which civil discourse breaks down or is difficult in your particular field. Brett, I think you just did that because I think race and racial sort of allyship is fundamentally what has brought you to the notoriety that you have. Sam, do you want to take on faith?
Sure. Yeah. So, haven't I already done that?
This is back to the beginnings.
There's no obvious downside.
So I guess the one sort of generic problem here is that many people, it seems most people, most of the time, whether they'll answer to this charge or not, it still is operating in the background. Most people imagine that wanting something to be true counts at least a little bit as evidence that it is true. I mean, there is this it functions as confirmation bias often, but I'm thinking of what is quite possibly the worst justification for religious faith I've ever encountered, and it's amazingly popular. It's some version of, I wouldn't want to live in a universe where there isn't a God who can hear prayers or who can look after things. I wouldn't want to live in a universe where there wasn't some basic love that was a principle of existence spread throughout the galaxy. Well, the fact that you have that preference says exactly nothing about the universe you're living in, right? And there's no place better than science to get that way of thinking beaten out of you, though it obviously can happen in science. But in science, we have pathologized it as confirmation bias or wishful thinking or some form of fraud. In religion, and with this notion of faith, it is in some cases it's explicit. I mean, it is explicitly proposed that because it is so, we can so readily believe in these things, that says something about the plausibility of the doctrines themselves. It certainly says something about their necessity or their usefulness. So I think the universal solvent that first has to be applied is differentiating what you have good reason to believe from what you otherwise would hope is true, wish weren't true, etc. And and this is why Pascal's wager, while it has done immense work in our conversation about religion for a few hundred years, has never made any sense. I mean, to consciously adopt a belief because it might be good for you to believe such a thing is not something we should be able to do. I mean, in order to actually believe a proposition to be true, you have to believe that you stand in some relationship to the fact such that if it weren't true, you wouldn't believe it. And wanting something to be true, or believing that it would be good for you if it were true, is precisely the wrong relationship to have with reality in order to actually be representing it faithfully. So yeah, the first, and this is one of the things that makes conversations on so many of these topics so difficult, because people come in with a very strong, visceral sense that certain things have to be true, otherwise the wheels come off of our common project together. So, race has to be an illusion, or it has to be true, depending on somebody's predilection. Systemic racism has to account for all of the differences we see in outcomes for people. Otherwise, something horrible that we can't begin to talk about will be true. And so we find ourselves often in conversations with people who have such an emotional attachment to things being a certain way that they're not even processing any argument you give one way or the other. And to even be giving some kind of counter argument is to be convicted in advance of some reprehensible moral, immoral commitment.
And if it's difficult to dissuade somebody of something that they want to believe in on some kind of social issue, then when the stakes are as high as eternal salvation and the meaning of the universe, it's even trickier, isn't it? Maajid, will you take Islam?
So you're saying these are areas that make it difficult to have
in
conversations
what respect
about
is
this,
it
right?
difficult to have a civil conversation about Islam?
It's easier to ask.
Let's just move right on to Douglas immediately, shall we?
Let me count the ways.
So it's often said when you're at a family dinner that the easiest way to torpedo the conversation is to talk about religion or politics. And I just happen to have to, as a professional hazard, to speak about both and their intersection on a daily basis. And Islam happens to be probably today the most difficult religion in terms of its relationship with the world. And I say today as a qualifier because it's obviously there's nothing, I think, predetermined for that to remain this way forever. But that's where we are at the moment. And so your introduction pretty much summed it up. I, up until recently, thank you very much, SPLC, up until recently was listed on both sides of the Atlantic on two separate lists for attempting to have this conversation. Some of you probably have heard of the SPLC debacle. For them, victory for me.
Just explain it, Maajid.
So, I'll allow that. At any one given time, this time last year, I was on two separate lists. In the United Kingdom, I was listed by Thomson Reuters World Check, which is a database, I think Australians say data.
We will understand. We have television here.
Shall I slow down and use subtitles? So it's a database that banks, border agencies, and all types of corporates, accountancy firms subscribe to do background checks on the person that they're servicing, right? So if you're going to an accountancy firm, they want to know if you're involved in financial terrorism. If you are, they don't want to do your accounts. If you go to a bank, likewise, they don't want you to bank with them if you're involved in financial terrorism. Border agency is self-explanatory. So all of these different, quite powerful institutions subscribe to Thomson Reuters, yes, the journalism agency Reuters, that runs a database called World Check that is run on a subscription model for profit. And for some reason, I found myself under the category red terrorism designation of this Thomson Reuters World Check database. So in the United Kingdom, I was listed under a category red terrorism designation, which meant bank accounts were shut down. It meant I had trouble at borders, and it meant that accountancy firms were refusing to work with me. And yet, at the same time, so this is Muslim terrorism, right, listed. At the same exact time, across the Atlantic in the United States of America, I was listed by the Southern Poverty Law Center as an anti-Muslim extremist. And so these two lists were going side by side. And it got to a point where, as you can imagine, both are very powerful and influential organizations. The Southern Poverty Law Center was used by the FBI. It was, of course, it's the organization that George Clooney gave $1 million to, and Tim Cook, head of Apple, gave $2 million to. That means $3 million, which eventually I won when I sued them. I actually won $3.4 million because they offered me $3 million. I said no, and then I made $400,000 in a day.
Somehow I think you're not going to get an Apple commercial out of this.
So, now, I also sued the Thomson Reuters World Check, but actually, in the United Kingdom, when you sue for defamation, Douglas, just in case it ever happens to you, you've got to sue in America, right? Because though it's harder to prove, it's actually, you win a lot more. So I only got 40,000 for Thomson Reuters World Check, pounds, sterling. But the point being, seriously, is that...
You're getting dinner, Maajid.
I became tired of... I was unable to move, because you can imagine, these lists, I mean, so SPLC had its power, its influence, and people were listening to it. And World Check is what it is. Banks, accountancy firms, you know, I had bank accounts, literally bank accounts were shut down. It became very difficult for me to operate. And when you get to that stage, you know, using the law to sue for defamation is usually, it's a last recourse, because it's high risk. Imagine I'd lost that case in the Southern Poverty Law Center. People would then forever say, look, he is an anti-Muslim extremist because he sued them and he lost. It's a very high-risk strategy. But in the end, of course, I'm vindicated on both sides. But that kind of symbolizes, I think, this example symbolizes what's wrong with this conversation. That you try and have a reasonable conversation. And people that know Quilliam's work will know that to categorize me as a Muslim terrorist is just absurd. And also, people that know that I continue to identify as a Muslim, to categorize me as an anti-Muslim is absurd. And if I am not safe from that kind of absurdity, then, you know, try and get a normal everyday person to have this conversation, who doesn't have the access to those resources, who doesn't want to basically play Russian roulette with whether they're going to win a court case or not, and forever be tarnished if they lose, you know? And then imagine how difficult it is for the average person here to have that conversation that we're saying we should all be having, and get away without being harmed.
Or just ostracized from the room that you happen to be having the conversation in, or hounded on Twitter until you leave that dreadful platform. Douglas, why don't you take immigration?
Sure. Let me start by saying something I wanted to chip in on your previous question, which is some of the reasons why it's hard. And let me start with this one. It's 18 years since I wrote my first book, and something in my own professional life, I'm not that old, but something in my own professional life has very fundamentally changed in that time. And I've been trying to work out how to sum it up, and it's something like this. I was, when I started becoming a writer, aware that to be a writer, or to be a good writer, you should make sure that you write in such a way that no honest critic can misrepresent what you have said. That if you're a public speaker, no honest critic could misrepresent honestly the content of your speech. And something has changed. I think it's information technology, social media, and more. Something has changed in the last couple of decades to get us to the situation I would now summarize as everyone who writes and speaks in public has to write and speak in a manner that ensures that a dishonest critic couldn't dishonestly misrepresent what you've said, which basically cannot be done. It's an almost impossible task. And I try to resist this as a writer and try to continue to say what I think, but even I'm aware of occasions when I might shave something off. An example.
Self-censor.
Yeah, I mean, there's an example, let me give you one just quite recently. Some years ago at a friend's memorial service, a great son of this country, Barry Humphries, was giving a eulogy, and he read a poem, and it's one of the only times I've burst out laughing at a memorial service. Barry Humphries read this poem that our late friend had wanted him to read, and it was an E.E. Cummings poem, and it was sort of 4 lines, and it made no sense. And all of us sitting in the congregation were sort of... Anyhow, Barry Humphries read these 4 lines and then at the end said, "I've no idea what that poem means." But he said, if there's anyone here who does understand and can tell me, I will give them a box of black magic chocolates. None of us had heard of black magic chocolates for years. They're still around. Anyhow, with some friends, it became the sort of thing. We often used to joke, whoever's late to dinner has to give everyone else a box of black magic chocolates or whatever. Anyhow.
By the way, to our American audience, Barry Humphries was the man behind Dame Edna, which is probably what they would know. He's bafflingly unfamous in the States.
Well, it's their fault for being ignorant about that. So, anyway, the reason I tell you this story is because some time ago I was writing a piece and I was being rude about something or someone, and I said at some point, and I give a box of black magic chocolates to whoever can come up with the answer to this. And I just realized, first of all, not everyone was in on the joke, obviously. Secondly, it was sort of fun enough, but the main thing was I suddenly thought there's just no point in saying black magic chocolates. I just should change it to like Roses or Quality Street or something. And I told this to a black friend of mine who was like, "You did what?" And I was just like, well, I just thought, like, somebody might think, why would he choose black magic chocolates? There's something sinister about that. It's and I just thought, why risk any hassle? So I just threw in Quality Street or something like that. Anyhow, the point is that you can't really do that. You can't write in order that some absolute maniac won't dishonestly accuse you of something you're not guilty of. So if I feel that, I know that a lot of other people do. The other thing that's really stopping conversation these days is the idea that you can't speak about any experience that isn't your own. The sort of breakdown, the identity politics reduction, which means unless you're a woman, you can't speak about anything to do with women. Unless you're a man, et cetera, unless you're this color, you can't talk about that. Unless you're this religion, you can't talk about that. Unless that's your sexual practice and orientation, you can't talk about that. Which just, it's forever cutting off conversation, which actually is connected to all of us. We're not these weird subsections. We're also a society. We're also communities beyond that kind of breakdown. And this is making almost all discussion very difficult. And it comes back to what Maajid just said, which is the cost of entry is being made too high for most people. That's my general view. Yeah. If somebody watches what Maajid has put up with in the work he's done, like, why would you do that? Why would you get into that? It happens to be one of the most important things you could get into, but why would you put up with that crap? You could go off and do something else. And this is one of the great successes of the people who've pushed back against Maajid, who've pushed back on all of us in some way. And just one other thing, which is worth throwing out there, which is what I call the YouTubeization of discussion. And the YouTubeization of discussion goes something along these lines. It happens to me sometimes, by the way. I'm sometimes on YouTube and I'll be looking for the latest clip of Eric Weinstein or Stein. Oh my God, I just Steined you, yeah.
Forever Stein.
Eric, I'll be looking up on YouTube. And sometimes there's something that will come up and it'll be like 10 times Douglas Murray annihilated someone or something. Or watch Douglas Murray destroy this person. And I sometimes go, oh, I wonder what I did then. and I click, and I don't do this often, by the way. It's only like most days. No, but I click sometimes, and I go, oh, well, that's just what we used to call a discussion.
Yep.
But it's presented in that way, and very rarely do you actually annihilate someone on television. But the problem about this is it seeps into the general discourse, and I notice people now do this in television studios. They go on in order to have the YouTube excerpt of it announced as X destroys Y utterly and makes him cry. And most discussion isn't like that.
But in your case, it really is.
Oh, well. Well, sometimes. Sometimes, yeah, okay. Anyhow, but that makes it very difficult as well, because people, as somebody said, are auditioning for another medium.
Just talking of auditions, I've just got to make very clear. I did audition today to come here as a woman, but it didn't accept my application. So I noticed that. Yeah.
You're
Yeah, it
going
is
to have to
somewhat
work
male-heavy.
harder at it, I would say. You're not really pulling it off.
It is a.
You can transition at any point in this conversation.
Precisely. That's what's going to give it the gender balance.
Good.
I didn't really answer your question.
You
but
didn't
I
answer. I mean,
I answered a load of other
you didn't
questions
even
of my
come
own
close.
invention.
I don't even think the word immigration appeared in your answer once.
I don't remember it.
We'll treasure that moment.
An incredibly novel position on immigration, just articulated by Douglas Murray.
But I think you raised some interesting issues which I want to come back to. And so, Eric, one thing that I think that you could speak to here is I've been interested in your sort of defense of disagreeableness. In other words, do you want to take on the question of civility itself? In other words, whether or not we can have civil conversations about incivility and civility. I mean, lately it seems like we can't even talk about whether or not we should be being civil without being uncivil about that.
Yeah, there's a lot of chicken and egg in our future on this one. There's an old definition of a gentleman as a man who's never rude by accident, and it's very important that incivility be a spice and not a substrate or a main course. So once in a blue moon, it's perfectly reasonable to eviscerate someone when they are behaving badly, and it's in fact necessary for civility to forcibly let people know that you're quite unhappy. I think that the bigger issue here has to do with something that, like, what really can't we talk about? If you think about what happened in medicine, we had this concept of iatrogenic outcomes, where the harm was done by the hospital, the healer, the nurse, the medicine. And there was a tremendous amount of harm done by people in the healing professions. And this was very confusing. It's a kind of societal autoimmune disease. You want medicine, you want hospitals, you want healers, and in fact they were doing a tremendous amount of harm, and it was very difficult to talk to your priestly class and say, wow, you guys are totally out of control and you're killing people like crazy. What is making this so difficult is what I would call journogenic effects. That is, everything that we do passes through this kind of sense-making apparatus. And the sense-making apparatus is suffering from some kind of crazy autoimmune disease where we absolutely need journalism. I mean, make no mistake about it. We need journalists, we need journalism, and what we have is crowding out the journalism that we need. So it's very confusing, right? Because at some level you hear somebody like President Trump saying, the press is the enemy. And in some weird way he's right, and in some weird way he's terribly wrong. So, if you take Maajid's situation, it's only confusing to Maajid because he hasn't studied quantum mechanics deeply enough to realize that he's Schrodinger's Muslim.
I told you he was the maths nerd of the Marvel group.
And, poor Douglas didn't understand that he needed magic chocolates of color, and then everything would be fine. We're in some situation where we're trying to figure out what can we say so that we do not find ourselves tomorrow hating our own existence because we've wound up in some previously respectable paper or news program completely misportrayed. So let me just ask you, how many people here, like I'm sitting on the far right of this panel, how many people here are on the far right? Okay. How many people here are the alt-right? Okay. Tomorrow, there's going to be a paper that says, if anybody covers this at all, a collection of 6 intellectuals was assembled on stage as a gateway drug to the alt-right. Popular with the alt-right. And it'll go on, alt-right, alt-right, alt-right. Now, by perseverating, by just repeating something over and over again, like, are there any women in the audience tonight? Okay, technically you don't exist. I'm sorry to say it. Because you're all frustrated white male incels. You don't know this, but it will happen, right? And, we had our friend Jordan Peterson talking to Nellie Bowles of the New York Times, who preceded the esteemed Sarah Jung into this august paper of record. And he, of course, used the phrase enforced monogamy. So what was he going to do with enforced monogamy? He was going to redistribute hot females to incapable males to solve the problem of potentially dangerous mass murderers in Canada. Now, I say this sort of jokingly, but it's really not a joke. I mean, these people are absolutely insane, right? It's complete insanity, and it's insanity in the heart of our sense-making apparatus.
Why is it insane? Sorry, Martin.
You tweeted something, didn't you, explaining what enforced monogamy meant in a sociological or anthropological sense?
Well, I didn't want to do that, in fact.
I retweeted you.
I know.
Yeah. I did.
You did your part.
A moment of...
Dangerous Muslim, non-Muslim. Retweets psychopathic Jew.
You might need to
We got a good thing going, Mud. So in this situation, what I did was I said, you know, enforced monogamy is not unknown to evolutionary theory, but it's certainly a term that I've heard before, I guess it's coming out of anthropology. So I figured the New York Times would probably have used this exact reserved term. So all I did was put in the reserved term in quotes, enforced monogamy. Sure enough, I get 2 results, both of them positive, from previous articles in the New York Times, one of which was talking about reforms in Afghanistan, which were pro-female, and the other one was talking about breeding in fruit flies, which was again, you know, extended to the idea that this would be a positive thing. So these people are on both sides of the aisle. The real thing that's happening is that you have this thing which I call the alt-right, with W-R-I-T-E, right? And what it does is it takes this alternate sense-making collective, which is what I think the intellectual dark web is, and it misportrays it because it's not reporting on us. It says, oh, you're a competitor. We have a job to do, which is to take you out. And the whole problem of this thing is they didn't count on a large collection of people who disagree about very many things, who have different shades, different genders, different sexual orientations, getting along, and shoving a middle finger in their face and saying, you're not getting away with this. And furthermore, what we're finding out, we are just the advanced wing of this group that you all are, right? This is what I call IDW Nation. It's people, it's people who are coming, you're all over the world, we can have meetups, people can find each other. There's no reason to continue to live in fear of what I call the Chihuahua effect, which Bret was talking about. You've got this tiny number of very vocal, annoying people. I mean, I did a poll on Twitter, and I said, if you have an issue between gender and sex, and you have 2 groups that could adjudicate it, one is gender studies and one is biology, who would you trust? Well, 50% of the comments are like, oh my God, you don't even get the difference between gender and sex. You're so offensive, you're so backward. Thanks, Grandpa, blah, blah, blah. Also comments about my hair, which I really don't understand. The only thing is that 50% of the comments didn't correspond to the 60,000 people who wrote in, where only 5% of them trusted gender studies over biology, right? So this is the whole thing, is that you're living in a gaslit illusion. And the big problem is you've lost your sense-making apparatus. Now, we are not set up to cover the world's news. We're not set up to, teach full courses at a university. That may happen at some point. But fundamentally, what we're trying to do is take back the sense-making apparatus. And what you really need to do is to look for this journogenic corruption of sense-making, because it's a tiny network of people that has crawled into your sense-making apparatus the way a hermit crab crawls into a shell that you already know. Well, it's got a new inhabitant, and it's going to derange everything if you continue to let it. And what all I ask is, take the 5% of you that are the bravest, that are the most financially secure, and raise your voices. This can be the nucleation event where, this is the largest public gathering of us that has ever taken place. Thank you, Australia. Let this be the nucleating event. And this is what will take back this journogenic harm that is coming out of our organs that should be giving us sense, but are actually giving us nonsense and deranging us as Iago deranged Othello against Desdemona. God, I love these people.
We're a very Shakespearean country. I would just wonder whether or not the failings of the conventional mainstream media that you call insane and you seem to think are occur out of a sort of sense of feeling threatened by the conversations that you guys are having are actually better attributable just to mediocrity, groupthink, and laziness and sloppiness. I mean, as someone who works in the establishment professional media myself, in that article that you were alluding to with Jordan in the New York Times, the journalist didn't even explain why she thought that enforced monogamy would be a bad thing. She wrote, "I scoffed and laughed because it's all so absurd." I'm paraphrasing, but that was the sort of the gist of the line. And then she didn't go on to explain why it's absurd. She assumes that every single person reading that is automatically going to agree with her and just be laughing and scoffing. Well, I wasn't laughing and scoffing. I wanted to know what she thought. If she wants to tell me that it's absurd, then she has to explain why it's absurd. To me, that is just the assumption that that everyone agrees with you, and you're blind to your own bubble. It's not feeling threatened.
I'm sorry. So you want to know about disagreeability? I want to take the other side of this.
Yeah, go for
counterpart.
it. Yeah.
No, this lady first called up Bret, and then she called up me, and she had something that she really wanted to write. She wanted to write about MRAs, right? Now, I did not know what an MRA was, and she said, "Well, of course, you're an important MRA," and I said, "I don't even own a gun," and she said, "No, not National Rifle Association, Men's Rights Advocate." I said, "Huh?" Or activist, or something. I don't even know what it is, right? So the point is, we have an ugly suit, and we'd like to fit you into it. And the answer is, well, I decline. I do not wish to wear your ugly suit. Well, you can't do that. We're the New York Times, and we're the paper of record. And my feeling is, no, you're just some lady, and you're not really particularly good at what it is that you do, and that's your problem. Now, in the case of Ezra Klein, he just gave a defense of Sarah Jong. And I did not know this. Boy, did I learn a lot from this article. I really
also, just to people who haven't been following the Sarah Jong thing or who aren't on Twitter quite as much as we are, or who are listening in the future.
How many of you guys have heard about Sarah Jong? You're raising your hands. I can't see anything.
Shout.
All right.
Who wants to explain it briefly?
Sarah Jong, we did not know. She came out of, I guess, Vox. The Vox group.
I mean, just keeping it very brief, she's someone who the New York Times has
hired to the editorial
board, one of the most important positions in terms of shaping the opinion of the paper. And it turned out that over the course of some years, several years ago, she tweeted things that were anti-white racism.
Things like all white men, I think, should
cancel
die.
all white people.
Kill all white men and stuff like that, which basically apparently means...
Well, and what I was going to get at is she came out of some group that was like snarky, and sassy. And snarky and sassy meant that you had like hashtag kill all men. And haha, okay. Well, you could say, well, hashtag Pepe, well, no, Pepe is horrible. Pepe is a threat to democracy.
So designated as a hate symbol by the SPLC, I'll have you know. It's true.
By the way, you have to get me in on this racket because I really need $3 million. But
Pepe is now...
But what we're learning about is that fundamentally these people see this as they've been in this little sort of sub-society, which is like witty and snarky to them, and they are highly empathic with themselves, and they're completely they have no empathy for anyone else. So if you make any joke that isn't from their collective, they just think this is the worst thing. And they want to tell us that we all need to be more empathic in the way that they are empathic, which is to transfer empathy from everybody in society evenly and invested in a tiny number of people who've won the intersectional Olympics over oppression, and to take it away from everybody else who might be worthy. Well, when you start to make these kinds of defenses, it is transparently obvious that you're not playing a fair game, right? You're admitting, when you're up for kill all men as a hashtag, which is like, okay, that's mildly offensive and that she probably shouldn't have done it, but then somebody else makes black magic chocolates and they need to be guillotined. This is prima facie obvious. I want to remind people that in the United States, we begin important documents like, we hold these truths to be self-evident. We don't explain these things. This is beneath analysis. This is transparently obvious. There are some places where you just set a recursion limit. You say, if you're going around saying, kill all men, and you're also trying to enforce microaggressions, that they be stopped, that is the end of the argument. That is, you have effectively tapped out in the language of adult conversation. And what we don't know is how this network has remained in these organs when they are effectively saying, we are completely full of it and cannot be trusted.
I want to explore this, this question of microaggressions and what, Douglas, you were just talking about how anodyne and banal one's creative output has to be if you're terrified of triggering a tripwire. Has anyone seen the Reddit image of, the caption is, me trying not to offend someone when I tell a joke, and it's a picture of someone with all of those laser beams, like, you know, in Mission Impossible, kind of contorted, like they're playing Twister, like so they don't touch the red line, and then underneath it someone has responded, my mother was killed by a laser beam, you asshole.
That's exactly.
So, Sam, when you were on my podcast, We the People Live, which I hope everyone subscribes to, you were talking about this in the context.
It's the one with Hannibal Buress that went
no,
so well?
it wasn't. It was the other.
Okay.
It was the other one of the other episodes that you were on where you were. I was running you through some memes. If you do a Google image search for Sam Harris, what comes up are just a treasure trove of photos of him looking sinister. Maybe with red, maybe like turned red with there's blood coming down your face or something, and things that you've said that people regard as being totally outrageous.
Right.
And I sort of read some of these things.
You can see I've been following Douglas's advice quite well.
Yeah, and
saying the thing that can't be misrepresented.
And you were saying that there are certain that it would be impossible to be a sparkling and interesting writer if your criterion for yourself was that you were never going to write anything that could be intentionally misrepresented and taken out of context.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that?
Well, the truth is, as Douglas gave us each iteration of this, that the final one is truly impossible to defend yourself against. I mean, it's just someone who is hell-bent on misleading people as to what your position actually is will find some way to do that, no matter how anodyne your writing is or isn't. So I've cleaned up my speech and writing a little bit because some hassles just aren't worth it. So insofar as you can foresee the hassle in real time coming your way as you're forming each sentence, it's, I found it useful to just be aware of not making life needlessly difficult for myself. And that comes at some expense. I mean, because there is a lack of color and a lack of fun and freedom in the act of communication when you can assume a modicum of intelligence and goodwill from on the part of your audience, and you can assume that the people who are following the plot will defend you adequately against the people who are maliciously misrepresenting you. Well, then you're kind of free to just to have fun on the high wire a little bit. But it's becoming, it's gotten so bad with respect to my podcast that there are people who will edit the audio of my podcast so as to make it sound like I'm saying the opposite of what I was saying in context. So and then there are people who will broadcast those edits to millions of people, and there is no defense against that except to have a large enough audience that cares to push back against it, so that there's this kind of ambient groan whenever that happens, and people notice. But it's a bad job to have to do it oneself, and in fact I'm now convinced it's almost always counterproductive to defend yourself, because it makes it's boring for all the people who are following the plot and who understand that, in my case, I'm not a racist and misogynist and advocate of genocide against all Muslims or whatever. These are kind of the greatest hits of my detractors. So for me to say yet again in some form, whether it's an article or a podcast or a public talk, listen, I don't actually want to annihilate hundreds of millions of people with nuclear weapons today. That's not my position.
That happens next Tuesday.
Right. Yes, no, that's, a few things would have to happen before we would have that conversation about mass genocide. So the people who know that you're not a genocidal maniac don't need to hear you take that particular foot out of your mouth again and again. And the people who are committed to thinking you're a terrible person are truly incorrigible. They're unreachable. And some of them have very large platforms. I mean, they're people who will never apologize. Even if when they do it inadvertently, there are people who will never apologize for getting something catastrophically wrong in terms of damaging a person's reputation. So it is unwinnable, and what you continually send the message that you are spending all your time concerned about your reputation and the misrepresentations of things you've said, and it clogs up your bandwidth so much that you at every moment it's a forced choice between cleaning up someone else's mess, which took them like 5 seconds to create, or doing profitable and interesting work yourself. And so I'm making much more, I'm making the choice. It's not even a choice anymore, because the truth is, having pulled back from social media to the degree that I have, I don't even see these small fires that are getting set all the time. And what's interesting about the Sarah Jeong thing is that I think most people who are not on Twitter have no idea about this story. I mean, this was a confection largely of social media. The pushback, her transgressions, all of the carping about the double standard at the Times. I mean, maybe it's appeared in the Atlantic or some other real journal, but whenever I mention this to someone, because the truth is I barely saw it, because I pulled back enough from Twitter that I saw it, but it was not
But you have
something
to
I
be
was
careful
immersed
here,
in.
Sam, because in part, your pulling back from social media is a comment which is like, most of the stuff doesn't really matter. And in the case of Sarah Jeong, if what you're saying is true, and I think it is somewhat true, it really matters, and thank God for social media in that particular instance. So you can't say either Twitter isn't real life,
No,
right? Because sometimes it really is the only thing covering something. And then in other cases, you can get sucked into some shitstorm that just absolutely doesn't matter. And so if you're blissing out on meditation, you can afford to go right through it.
Well,
That was a low blow.
It's actually worse than that, though, because
No?
it is real life. See, I'm in the uncomfortable position of knowing that most of my life is, in fact, online. I mean, most of my reputation is online. Anything that could happen materially to harm my career would be happening online. And yet, I find the return to sanity, born of not paying much attention to it, so valuable that it's like that. It's.
I think what you're saying is what you said to me when we had dinner in London during the World Cup final that
Right.
we lost.
Yeah.
You're saying that you deactivated it from your phone.
Right.
So you're not constantly, how you ruined your family holiday because you were responding to Ezra Klein
Yeah.
on your tweets,
Yeah.
and you had your wife and kids there. So what you're saying is that you're taking it off your phone. It's not that you're disengaging completely.
No,
from
but
social
I've
media.
disengaged to the point where it's like I was, because it was on my phone, I was probably checking it, I don't know, some humiliating number of times a day. I mean, it had to be 30 times a day.
Yeah.
And I don't know how much time that accrued each day, but it was considerable. And again, it felt totally justified. This is my job to pay attention to. I'm following all kinds of smart people. I'm following all of you. I see the articles you think I should read. I go ahead and read those articles. It seems incredibly useful. And then I see all the sniping that eventually produces something which I think, well, fuck, I have to respond to this, right? This is beyond the pale. And then, and Ezra Klein was one of those, right? But then I see that even in the best case, when one of these, skirmishes that takes hours or days that results in blog posts or podcasts or something, even when it resolves in a way that seems as satisfying as possible to me and my side, right, where I feel like, oh well, I finally put that to rest. At best, it's getting back to zero for me. It's like, it's not like even when you're winning, on some level, you're still an asshole.
Right. But
and again, I say that knowing that things of real consequence, like what was so phantasmagorical about that episode on with Ezra Klein was that because I was on vacation and trying to salvage what yet remained of a vacation, I was just paying attention to social media out of the corner of my eye, right? And that was enough that was the worst possible way to split the baby, because I was still responding, but doing it ineptly because I wasn't actually totally following the plot. But now I've actually lost the plot in my own head.
Can I
Brett, jump in, and then Douglas.
Go for it.
So I want to try to synthesize a little bit of what I think we're learning here, because there's a big punchline, and it has to do with the fact that social media and YouTube are so new that we don't yet know the rules of how to wisely interact with these things. And so I think you're soon to discover that you've solved one problem and you will have created another, and when it comes for you, you're going to figure out how to navigate.
Right. Oh, before you jump in, let me just finish the thing I forgot to say, is that I then had the surreal experience because I was not paying attention to social media, and I was, quote, living in the real world, right? So now I'm back at the pool with my family, and everything is fine, I think. But now I'm getting emails from people who I haven't heard from in a very long time, saying, I just wanted to reach out and say, I'm so sorry this is happening to you, right? And those are very ominous emails to get, especially when you're not paying attention.
There's a type of friend who will always alert you to a bad review. Yeah. I'm so sorry to see.
Brett, just finish that thought.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say, Maajid and Douglas both said something that resonated very strongly for me, which is, if I am endangered by saying these things, what is it like for somebody who doesn't have the position that I have to say them? And I went through this exact thing. When I decided to challenge the phony equity coalition at Evergreen, I thought explicitly, I discussed with Heather the fact that I believed my record was so clean on the topic of race, and that I had everything I needed to defend myself, that I was in fact safe enough to take the risk. What I now know is that I would have been annihilated but for Dave Rubin, Joe Rogan, Sam Harris, and Eric, and that those forces actually produced enough counter-narrative online to save me from what would have been my fate absent those mechanisms. So that is a very important discovery, and I think what it says is that most people actually simply do not have the firepower, they don't have the record that will allow them to defend themselves against some of these stigmas, and what is necessary is that we figure out how to engineer our way around that problem.
But Douglas has been,
Yeah.
waiting patiently,
Just to say,
looking at me.
I was about to make the same point as Brett was going to make, but just to refine it this way, I mean, the reason why so many people are going mad is, yes, we haven't found a way to deal with speaking to the world. I mean, it is impossible to find the manner of speaking which could simultaneously be you and a few people in a room, you and the people at your dinner, and possibly everyone in the world. It's jokes are the most obvious one. There is no joke so funny that it can be repeated to everybody in the world all the time.
Forever.
Forever.
Yeah.
And we all know most jokes have some edge somewhere. Most of them are not going to last 5 years, let alone et cetera, et cetera. So jokes are the obvious one. The other one is, and I was very worried by what Sam said about that, about the same self-censorship, or not self-censorship, but that thing of stepping back slightly, because what is the problem for politics in all of our countries at the moment? What has produced this backlash in politics? It's that we've had a generation of politicians who can never say anything meaningful in front of people. I mean, I spend a certain amount of my life on shows with politicians, and I know, and Maajid knows, that basically you see it in their eyes.
Yeah.
The aim is to survive the next half hour without plausibly or otherwise being accused of racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, or something else. And you can see it in the other politicians. There's no meaningful win. The hope is that the other person says something which allows you to say, I think that's quite offensive to X group of people. And then the person goes, oh no. And then they're on the ropes and you got them. And if you get enough other people, you destroy them and they're dead. And that's it. And the point is that this is why politicians can't
this
say
could
anything.
be your effect on these politicians.
Yeah, it may be. But the point is that this is why politics is going bad, because you can't tell any truth to that kind of audience. Now, the problem is, if down from politicians, or up from politicians maybe, you have the same effect, that the rest of the world also suffers the problem that politicians have of how to speak to everyone all the time.
There's a reason for this, right? So that's a perfect segue to what I was going to say, actually. So thank you, because actually politicians, the reason that happens to politicians, if you go back to what I was saying earlier about everyone speaking to their audience and worrying that their audience will turn against them online, well, if you think about that with your social media followings and not wanting to lose followers and not wanting the mob to turn against you on social media, politicians have for a long time been living that because we live in democracies. And so the politician is constantly worried about the mob turning against them. And what's happened with social media is all of us have become small p politicians because we all have a following and we all have an audience, and we don't want that mob to turn against us as they would a politician after a 5-year term. So now all of us are in danger of becoming that boring politician that doesn't say anything interesting because we're trying to offend the least amount of people when we speak. Now, this is why I wanted to just very quickly, I know you want to come back into this, mention an example that is particular to the UK, but you may have heard of. So our former Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, who's now not the Foreign Secretary, but is positioning or jockeying to be something or the other in the nation. No one really knows what Boris thinks.
I think we all think he wants to be Prime Minister. But
So, formerly at Douglas's
my first editor.
magazine of repute. So Boris Johnson has said something. If I were sitting in front of you here today on this stage, wearing a full black burqa and a niqab covering my face veil, and the only thing you could see of me were my eyes, you probably wouldn't be too happy.
Unless you would transition to being a woman before.
I was about to say, not because, of course, most of you may want to see my face, but actually because when you communicate with somebody on stage, a large part of communication is facial expressions and body language. And if I'm concealing all of that from you, and the only thing you're hearing is a muffled voice coming through, behind a veil like this, then of course it interferes with the communication. Now, there's nothing controversial in what I've just said at all, right? You probably want to see the person you're speaking to, but a word Eric used earlier, we're living in a gaslit world. So that phrase, gaslighting, when I'm telling you that what you know for a fact to be the reality isn't actually the reality, and instead I'm making you question your sanity because you're seeing the reality in a different way. And so I'm pretending that what you know to be true isn't actually true, you're just going a bit mad. We all know it's true that when you're talking to somebody, you want to see their face, their body language, and their facial expressions. We all know that intuitively. And so along comes Boris Johnson, and he says something frankly a bit, bombastic, using his typical bombastic style, and he compares women in face veils to what we say in England is letterboxes. I think the Americans call them mailboxes. I don't know what Australians refer to them as.
Well, now you put me on the spot. What do we call them?
Right? You know where you
Letterbox,
slide
right?
the letter into the slot.
Yeah, letterbox.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
So he uses this phrase. Now, this is, keep in mind, somebody wants to be Prime Minister, certainly former Foreign Secretary, a senior politician in the country. And the backlash has been unbelievable, to the point where the head of the London Metropolitan Police, the largest police services in the UK, Cressida Dick, she referred the London Metropolitan Police to investigate as to whether this was a criminal offence.
Yeah.
And the incredibly scary news is that the London Metropolitan Police reported back to the head of their police force, Cressida Dick, and said, we've looked into this, and there's currently insufficient evidence to prosecute Boris Johnson for a criminal offence. The fact that it even came to that question is what
What would the
worries
offence
me.
be, Maajid?
Hate speech.
It would have been hate speech. I did a debate at the East London Mosque about 5 years ago, which is widely regarded as being fairly radical in the UK. And it was on this, and the entire audience were niqabis and were wearing burqas. And I made the point quite often. I just didn't know who was speaking, and I thought it was quite a relevant point because it was like I don't know where who, we got somewhere. Yes, and I remember at one point one of the women pointed out that the reason why they did it is because there might be arousal in men, and the presenter very wisely said at one point, asked the important question, could a woman who wasn't wearing a burqa come to your house? And I would be able to take my burqa off. And they said, could Douglas come to your house? And I remember saying, I promise not to get aroused. And there was an audible inhalation of burqa. Anyhow,
Very quickly to finish the point I was going to make.
An audible inhalation.
If Boris Johnson, the point I was going to simply say is if Boris Johnson isn't safe from
Yes.
that mob, right?
Yeah.
And this is a man who held high office in the country, and if the police are looking into whether that they should criminally prosecute somebody that was the foreign secretary of the country, just imagine if the average person wants to have a conversation about whether actually they think it's important to see somebody's face.
But it's also just bullshit, isn't it? I mean, it's a false claim being made by people that this is such an outrageous thing to say. It's deliberately, it's people practicing oversensitivity in order to win a different political point.
That's the gaslighting that's going on,
It is
right?
constructed as a threat,
Yeah.
and that is why it is important. It's not the content, it's
Right.
not that it's true, it's that it will stick. And so
Right.
I really want to get to the flip side of this, which is what do we do to break the back of this thing?
And by the way, Brett,
And-
let's just pause and let people know that you'll be able to ask questions in just a few minutes, all right? So we will be taking questions from the audience, so I'll give you the final word on this particular session, Brett.
So what we're finding out, we're doing a note comparison up here, and we're finding out some important things. Typical to imagine, hey, if I'm barely able to say what needs to be said, what are people who are in a lesser position to say those same things facing when they do it? That there's this stigma that comes back. How do we engineer a reduction in the effectiveness of that stigma? Well, we also have another place where we can compare notes here. Everybody has seen Jordan Peterson having tripped over the idea of enforced monogamy with Nellie Bowles. But we have two other data points. Eric and I both talked to Nellie. She tried to get each of us to acknowledge that we were MRAs. I don't remember if I even knew what the term was, as Eric did not know, but the fact that she went through 3 members of the so-called IDW looking for somebody she could get to sign up for some position that would seem frightening, and finally landed on Jordan Peterson, who was maybe slightly less careful, tells you that this was not a journalist. This was somebody looking to establish a story that would stigmatize in this case, Jordan, the whole IDW. So you're getting a peek into what the mechanism is and how it functions. Now, how would you fight something like that? You would, A, take people who are in the strongest position to say difficult things, and they can provide cover for people who are in a slightly less strong position. So what you want is for safety to spread, because ultimately what breaks the back of this thing is numbers. It's large numbers of people saying, that's bullshit. Right? So if we can get there, it'll be a whole different landscape. Now, in terms of social media, we've got 2 things. We've got, or maybe it's 3. We've got the huge danger of getting sucked in, ruining your family vacation, losing your actual quality of life to this thing that can suck up all your time. You've got a very big liability in terms of social media being used. If somebody becomes truly dangerous to something powerful, then manipulating them through social media, in other words, creating phony outrage amongst a small number of accounts, can cause you to have your attention sucked into fighting something that isn't even real. But there is also a solution in social media to these problems. In other words, my experience of thinking I was safe enough to fight the phony equity coalition, discovering that in fact I wasn't anywhere near safe enough, absent the help of people who had a bigger following who could stamp out the fake narrative that I was a racist. So that kind of thing is the mechanism that we want to spread, which is to rescue honorable people from this phony outrage, from fake threats, stigma, all of these things, such that people in general can get back to a life where you are free to make a joke. And you are free to make a joke and discover, actually, that one's a little over the line. I regret it, but it's not like a revelation about some deep defect. So I would say at some level, I think we're learning the rules of a brand new landscape, and those rules are bound to be more interesting than we think. But there's a lot to be worried about.
Jon Stewart used to say that when he would interview Hillary Clinton, after asking a question, you could see her brain buffering to try to figure out whether or not she was going to say something that could even remotely be interpreted as being as giving offence to anybody. And you're sort of terrifying me that maybe we're all going to become Hillary Clintons in that respect. Let's take some questions from the audience. If you do have a question, can you come up to the microphone? And just a reminder, if you keep it concise, everyone will love you, and if you ramble, everyone will hate you. And also, questions end in question marks. They're not biographies. Yes, go for it over here.
I organise an IDW meetup in Sydney, for anyone. And next topic that we're going to be discussing is gender. And as part of that, one of the people said they're going to bring along a person who is an activist of the, LGBTQI, ABCD, whatever. And I made the very simple rule that if you want to come, you have to answer with arguments and not slurs. So is that a fair rule? And if yes or no, how do we stop becoming a kind of an echo chamber or strawman, the kind of identitarian arguments within this group of people?
Well, one request, can we bring up the house lights a little bit so we can see?
Do they want to say who the question's for, or is it just open?
Yeah, why don't you take your pick? Who would you like to answer it? Because all of them could.
Oh, okay. Whoever jumps in
Eeny,
first.
meeny, miny, moe.
Can I give one possibility? Because obviously this is a subject which is a more considerable landmine than many others as an issue. I think that one of the most important ground rules is this. You have to say, stop equating speech and violence. Stop saying, in all of this stuff, we need to find a way to think out loud. Okay? In a group like you're describing, or any other group, we have to find a way to think out loud and to try stuff out. Sometimes it will be wrong, often it'll be right, and so on, but we have to be able to have that ability. And one of the things that's stopping it is this endless equation of a thought that you've had and have voiced with the most extreme act of violence. So, for instance, if you say X, it's people like you that are the reason why so many of these people are killing themselves. You can't have any conversation if a part of the answer is being presented in that way. And I suppose just to see the people who are doing that as just using another tactic in order to win a particular sectional point. But allowing words to be words again is the beginning of some kind of solution.
Yeah, very quickly, there's something I said about that, because on the niqab debate, they were saying that Boris shouldn't have said what he said because it will encourage hate crime against Muslim women in niqabs. Now, I'm often repeat this mantra that I came up with, that no idea is above scrutiny and no person should be beneath dignity. And I'm all for protecting the dignity of the woman inside the veil while criticizing and even mocking the fact that she has to cover her face because somehow her beauty needs to be kept wrapped up like a sweet, which is the analogy often given in mosques. Now, if you follow this principle that you can't say something because it encourages hate crime against the person you're speaking about, you can't be critical of their ideas, you could apply it both ways. So I said that I put up a status, and it's like, if we can't speak about Muslim fundamentalism because it can be used, our critique of Muslim fundamentalism can be used to encourage hate crime against Muslims, then let's not also speak about anti-Muslim bigotry, because jihadists use that to recruit people to kill non-Muslims. It's a very real thing. Jihadists are killing non-Muslims, and they use Islamophobia, I don't like that phrase, they use Islamophobia as an excuse to recruit people. So likewise, we shouldn't speak about discrimination against Muslims either, because we're encouraging hate crime. And so in the end, what we find is that we can't say anything. We want to just shut up and not speak.
Well, that's the aim.
That is indeed. So I've just got to say, don't allow for anyone to tell you that when discussing ideas, you shouldn't talk about them because what somebody else might do. Of course, everyone's individually responsible. We have to be responsible for how we speak about our own ideas, but not for how other people abuse what we're trying to say. And I'll shut up on this point, which is I'm a bit wary about using the phrase intellectual dark web to describe anything about ourselves. And I'm here because I like these guys. And that's pretty much it.
That's exactly the way they talk on the intellectual dark web.
If I could throw in something
The
super
intellectual
quick.
dark web.
Eric coined it. I think it's your fault. Is it?
Yeah, I'm up for you doing this IDW thing. The simple thing I would say is if you go to an amusement park, you might see a sign that says you have to be this healthy to be on this ride. And so fundamentally, if the issue is going to come out that it's a question of compassion, you have to say, look, you have to be healthy enough in order to come to this meetup in order that you can participate in a discussion. And our compassion for you suggests that if you're not that healthy, we would prefer that you not attend the meeting so that you can care for yourself and hopefully nurse yourself to a point where you can actually handle some ideas that could be precursor to something dangerous. There's no way to avoid having saltpeter in the world because it can be a precursor to black powder. So you're totally within your rights to do that and do it from a position of compassion.
I also just want to point out that we are having a harder time answering that question because of the destruction of the concept of safe space, which should mean a space in which it is safe to take the risks of speaking off the cuff and discovering that your idea isn't as good as you thought or something like that. So safe space has been co-opted to be a space that you are safe from the possibility of offense, which is a space in which you can make no useful progress. But it should be recaptured and turned into a space in which you can take risks, and it is safe enough for you to do that, and that's really, I think, what you're looking to create, and it's a good thing.
And if the question is about how to deal with someone who you're bringing in order to advocate on behalf of minority sexualities, then I think that comes also back to the point that's been made several times about it not necessarily being necessary to be a member of that minority in order to be able to speak cohesively about it or convincingly about it. 1/3 of this panel is gay, and Douglas, you and I would probably agree that you can be a charitable person towards gay people and you can be pro-gay rights without being gay, and the idea that you have to be gay in order to understand how to have compassion and understanding towards LGBT people is crazy. Next question?
Well, first of all, thank you all for coming. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you all for coming, seriously.
So I thought I'd give this opportunity to ask a question from a friend of mine who's overseas and obviously couldn't make it to here. He says, I'm a liberal, secular, it's probably more for you, Maajid. I'm a liberal and secular guy born in Egypt but raised in the West. I'm always torn between returning to Egypt and helping to bring the political and cultural religious revolution that I want to live in, or staying in the West where I know I'll be happy and safe. What advice do you have for someone who desperately wants to fix the many problems in his country and make the world a better and more peaceful place, but isn't brave enough to go back there and do it himself? Is there anything I can do from a safe distance?
There's lots he can do. I wouldn't advise he go to Egypt. Clearly, I've been in jail in Egypt, and I wouldn't want him to suffer the same fate. Egypt, currently under Sisi, has regressed when it comes to human rights and clamping down on dissent. And they are worse than they were under Mubarak, who jailed us. So probably what he can do, is a serious need for, is stuff that's already being discussed in English by liberal reforming Muslims and ex-Muslims who are developing their own platforms, and there are conversations that are occurring across boundaries and countries. There's a desperate need for that to be translated into Arabic and disseminated online to the Arabic-speaking world. And that's where he could be of real use.
Thank you. Next question.
Yes, I wanted to ask Maajid, when it comes to coming up with liberal interpretations, either your work or Islamic scholars, do you find that you are able to believe the more liberal interpretation as sincerely as the more obvious literal one? And if not, are you ever sort of forced to, I don't want to say cynically, but sort of pretty up the clause, or do you just have to excise Allah's words altogether?
Well, I'm quite open about my lack of devotion to any religion, and so I don't necessarily have to refer to a book to tell me it's wrong to murder a baby or rape a child. I kind of know that from inside myself and my moral compass. What I try and do is defer in recognizing the pragmatic necessity for that kind of dialogue and discourse to happen in countries like Pakistan or Saudi Arabia, where if you take some of the stances I take, you're probably going to get killed before you finish your sentence. And so there is only, to my view, there's a pragmatic way forward, and that is to have that conversation within a certain discourse that is tolerated. You cannot remove the blasphemy law in Pakistan without having a religious conversation, because it's justified using religion. And if you try and circumvent that, they will kill you. And even the governor of Punjab, which is the country's most populous province, wasn't safe from the assassin's bullet. His own bodyguard shot him 9 times and killed him. And I know the family, and the consequences of what happened next are just unimaginable for some of the suffering. So the authorities caught the murderer, and so the jihadists decided to kidnap his son after having murdered the father, and then said, if you don't release the murderer, we'll kill the son as well. So in a context like that, where the governor of the wealthiest and most strongest province wasn't safe from the assassin's bullet, the only way you can have that conversation in this current climate is to speak in a language and a discourse that is tolerated. I don't do that, but at Quilliam, we have theologians that do that. And so, of course, that brings me to the second part of your question, which is, do they believe in some of the liberal interpretations that they advocate? I think that we discussed this in our book. I think that more important than whether they do or not, because I don't know what's inside their hearts, more important is the promotion of multiple interpretations, including conservative interpretations. The nature of Islam, Sunni Islam in particular, is that there's no church, there's no hierarchy, there's no clergy in Sunni Islam, which is 80% of Islam in the world. And so if we can approach it in a way, forgive the phrase, death by 1,000 cuts, I'm not advocating killing religion, though I'm sure Sam would be happy with that.
I'm going to tweet about it.
But that's something to take out of context for me. But if you look at that phrase, death by 1,000 cuts, the idea is if we can promote a multiplicity of interpretations, that develops a form of theological pluralism. The only system that we've come up with as humanity that can cater for that is secularism. Because theocracy, by definition, wants to pick the correct interpretation and enforce it. Now, if you've got Sunni Islam doesn't have a clergy, that doesn't make sense. Because if you don't have a clergy, you will have multiple interpretations. And the only kind of system that can cater for that, as I say, is secularism. And I think that's what I'm advocating. It's a political argument for a tolerance of a multiplicity of interpretations.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, hi. A bit closer. A friend of mine who I guess you could consider to be slightly on the far left a little bit said to me before this conference, have fun at your alt-right conference. And I think there was, a little bit of joking there. But I guess the question is to anyone, but probably more to Eric. What can we do? I know conversation is something that is extremely important, and I think if people actually listen to what you guys were saying, they'd know that that this is not an alt-right conference. I think there's a certain percentage of people that, because of what they already think about your reputation and what they've heard, they're not really going to listen to the things that you guys are saying, and some of us are saying. So the question, I guess, is, and I heard Eric sort of raise this topic in, I think it was a Dave Rubin talk, but the question is, what can we do, what can you guys do to actually show people, without them having to listen to you, but to actually do things to show them that not only when you're not alt-right, but you guys are the furthest thing from the alt-right. And I guess, and what can we do as well to be part of something, part of a movement that can I guess, help people and do positive things in the world, just to show people where we're not that kind of people.
Eric, sorry to jump in, Eric.
Great question.
Eric, just sorry to jump in. We've got three minutes, so apologies to all of you, the other people who are asking questions. You'll be able to ask your questions at the next session.
I tried, if you remember Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, they realize what they're going to need. They have a time machine. They put it back where they're going to need it, so they reach into the bushes and they get what they want. What I did before was I asked, how many of you are alt-right? And the audio is going to be released, right? And nobody said, I'm alt-right. Let me ask a question. How many of you are left of center? Woo! That was just me. Anybody else? Okay. The point is, we're going to start doing this with audio. We're going to start doing this with photographs. We're learning their game, and what we're going to do is we're going to start making them hate their own position, because they are going to look so stupid and so foolish. And you're correct, we haven't done enough for you, and so I want you, look, you guys are paying good money to be here. We're taking time to come all the way to Australia. Ask us these questions. What do you need to fight back? So I'm trying to do some audio for you so that in the future you can point to this exact place and say, you're full of shit. There is just no truth in what you're saying. In our family, Bret and I don't think anybody in our family has voted right of center since the 1920s, right? This is the funniest thing ever. Allow it to be humorous and join us. Thanks.
I guess what I just add is there that I'd like to show people that we're making actually positive change in the world. What can we do to actually make positive change?
Well,
so
you heard me on Dave Rubin's show when I said, hey, maybe we should actually try to do the same de-inflection of third-person singular pronouns, which are the only pronouns inflected for gender in the English language, that we did to the honorific Miss versus Mrs., where females were inflected for marital status, men were not. We came up with Ms. So I said, hey, do you want to actually take this on? Do you want to start with intersex rather than trans, which is a clear biological case where people are neither physiologically male nor female, right? We are going to show more compassion. We are going to start this process of winning. And what we need to do for you, right, this is the advance guard. We're here to try to take the hill so that the rest of you guys can hold it and then we can go on to the next one, right? And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to build into we're gaining strategy to hold the hills, to make these ridiculous perspectives funny rather than terrifying. And thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Bret.
I want to jump in and say one more thing, which is that this is an excellent place to scrutinize how the magic trick is done, right? How is it that we are portrayed as right, far right, alt-right, whatever it is? The way it's done is by getting people who would conclude something different were they to listen, not to listen. That's the key. So there will be something, maybe it's Nellie Bowles who comes to the New York Times and broadcasts something that makes somebody unhearable to the point that you will decide it is sophisticated not to listen to them. So the way to break that, especially in the case of whoever it was who just asked that question, you have a friend who believes this, but they also know you and you're here. So effectively, you can say the equivalent of, well, I dare you to listen and see whether you retain that interpretation. You won't be able to if you listen to what they actually say. The only way you can do it is if you maintain the cartoon you've been handed and you don't allow anything to challenge it, and that's really on you if that's what you choose.
Thank you all. Let's take a 30-minute break. We will be back. All of the people who didn't get to ask a question but who are standing there, just make sure that you push your way to the front of the queue next time, and we'll take more questions. We'll leave more time for questions in the next session. So a big thanks to all of you, and a big thanks to Pangburn Philosophy for making this happen.
Thank you.
We'll see you in a bit.